Okay, intersectionality, Kimberlé Crenshaw. If you recall, I introduced you to Kimberlé Crenshaw a few weeks back. But again, she has a master's in law from the University of Wisconsin, a Juris Doctorate, a JD from Harvard Law, a BA from Cornell University. Her areas of study include family, gender, and sexuality, social justice, and human rights. Areas of specialty are constitutional law, civil rights, critical race theory, intersectionality, feminism, and the law. She's a pioneering scholar and writer on civil rights, critical race theory, Black feminist legal theory, and racism, in the law. In addition to her position at Columbia Law School, she is a distinguished professor of law at the University of California, Los Angeles, at UCLA. The first piece is what intersectionality means today. It was pretty straightforward. It was a very, very short interview. So I just want you to be able to identify what is meant by material conditions. Material conditions are the actual real things that shape your life. They are the actual material realities that shape and inform and impact your everyday life. So your material condition would be your living arrangements, your financial situation, your family dynamics, those things, the kinds of things that inform your everyday life. She defines intersectionality again. She says intersectionality is simply about how certain aspects of who you are will increase your access to good things or your exposure to bad things in life. So again, if you think about this slide, the intersecting axes of privilege, intersectionality is not making a moral judgment one way or the other. It's saying that you have particular kinds of social norms, you have particular kinds of social markers that either adhere to societal norms or do not adhere to societal norms. And because of that, you are either experiencing forms of privilege or you're experiencing forms of underprivilege and oppression and domination. It's not a moral claim one way or the other. And it's not just meant to identify what's happening to people of color. Okay, in the film The Urgency of Intersectionality, Crenshaw begins talking about or listing some names, and she asks the audience to stand up, and she lists several men's names who had police interaction that resulted in police officers murdering them. And then she went and listed 4 women's names, and then she listed several more after that. But it was to see how many people would be left standing who had actually heard the names of the women who had also, during that same period of time, had interactions with police and the police murdered them. If you pay attention, from the very first woman's name, almost half of the people who were left standing, if not more, actually sat down. But I wanted to do the honor of actually telling you who these people are because their lives do matter. So Michelle Crusoe was a 50-year-old woman in Arizona, Phoenix, Arizona. She had bipolar and disorder and schizophrenia. And on August 14th, 2014, she had contacted a cab that failed to come. She then called the behavioral health provider for the Southwest network for assistance. I guess there were some words exchanged, and the manager at the Southwest network found that Michelle's comments were threatening and called the Phoenix Police Department. She was still at her apartment, so she was not at the center. She was nowhere near the center. She was actually at her apartment. She resisted the police officers and was holding a hammer. So the police sergeant shot her in the chest and killed her. They found that his actions were in violation of departmental policy. and demoted him in rank to officer. Tanisha Anderson is a 37-year-old woman, or was a 37-year-old woman who was also having a mental health episode. Her family called 911 for help, and a police officer was sent. Aldridge was a field training officer who trains officers fresh out of the police academy in everyday tasks. And rookie officer Myers responded to the call. They wound up handcuffing her. She was eventually tackled to the ground. One of the officers kneeled on her back and she died, and she lost consciousness. Neither Aldridge or Myers summoned an ambulance. A supervisor showed up sometime later and he called the EMS and they declared her dead. The medical examiner said that it was a homicide, sudden death associated with physical restraint in a prone position. She had heart disease and bipolar disorder. No charges were filed after a grand jury's decision. So no one was punished for that. Aurora Rosser was a 40-year-old Ann Arbor woman a 40-year-old Ann Arbor woman experiencing domestic violence or having a domestic violence dispute. When the officer came, she had a knife in her hand. One tased her, the other one shot her. No charges were filed. And I want to say that one was 2015 or 16. Megan Hockaday was a 26-year-old Oxnard woman and was killed by Officer Roger Garcia in 2015. She was also having a domestic violence dispute. She too had a knife and she was shot. Okay, the urgency of intersectionality. One of the things that I wanted you to think about is how many names did you know? There is a tendency for our public discourse when there's a police involved shooting and the shooting or police involved killing involves a Black male, there tends to be more of a public response to that than a Black female, which is one of the reasons why we have the Say Her Name hashtag that I talked to you about in the previous slide, and that Crenshaw actually practices at the end of this video. I want you to think about what a frame is and why does it matter? What is she arguing a frame is? And why does it matter? What gets lost when we don't have a frame of thought or a method for which through which to think about different social experiences? If you look here, you can see what she's describing as intersectionality when she first started thinking about it. It's that point in the middle where your different social constructed identities meet. Here's another one: gender identity, class, sexuality, race, disability are all along these roads like the previous diagram that I showed you, and you stand in the middle of that. Some of your identities might align with dominant culture, and as a result, you experience some privilege from that. And privilege in its most broad sense means that you don't have to consider that particular identity because that identity is constructed as a norm. You don't have to think about it in your day-to-day. You don't have to make space for it or think about what the implications are going to be, because that is your norm, right? You are a part of the norm in that way. So you are privileged in that way. I use the example that as a cisgendered woman, I don't have to think about what restrooms to use, if it's going to be safe for me to use a restroom, because that particular identity formation that I have is something that I adhere to, I agree to. As a cisgendered woman, I can be conscious and cognizant of the experiences of trans people and be conscious and cognizant of how my privilege exists and they are underprivileged in that space. They have to consider their gender identity and their gender performance in all spaces at all times, and whether or not that is safe for them or not, if that makes sense. I wanted to give you two definitions because we use these words often: framework and methodology. When she's talking about frames, she's talking about, in many ways, talking about frameworks. Frameworks provide the parameters for thinking about the problem and building or developing a solution, right? The methodology is how we systematically solve the problem. So if you think about a picture frame, the framework helps hold the picture in place so that you can look at it, you can plot it out, you can plan it, right? The methodology is the actual plan that you use in creating your new picture. Okay, so that's all I have on intersectionality. The next video is colorblind intersectionality.